A little over halfway through the Civil War, Lincoln finally finds his general. Lincoln places Ulysses S. Grant in charge of the military. One of his right-hand men is going to be William Tecumseh Sherman. They change the war strategy to one of what's called total war. Sometimes this is called hard war. The principle behind total war is making sure that all of the society feels the impact of the war. So as the Union soldiers went through the South, they made life hard for the civilians. They burned crops, they killed livestock, they tore down railroad tracks, they burned farms. Essentially anything that would make life difficult for the civilians in the South. The purpose of this being, they kept the civilians alive. The purpose of this was to make those soldiers in the Confederate Army have a difficult choice. Either keep fighting the war on the Union, against the Union on the front lines, or go back home and help their families. So this idea of total war starts after Grant is put in charge of the military. Sherman is most famous for this. After he wins the Battle of Atlanta, he begins what's called Sherman's March to the Sea. It's this 60-mile wide path of destruction from Atlanta basically to near Charleston, and then they swung back up into Columbia, South Carolina, and continued up into North Carolina. Grant, with his unrelenting attacks throughout the Wilderness Campaign, and eventually at Petersburg, where we see the first trench warfare emerging, really drains down the Confederate morale. The Anaconda Plan is in effect, which means the economic resources of the South are dwindling. People are starving. They're running out of supplies. Desertion rates in the Confederate military go through the roof. And eventually, they catch Robert E. Lee outside the Appomattox Courthouse. They're able to get Lee to surrender his army at Appomattox Courthouse, which is essentially the end of the war. It goes on a little bit further after that, but with the surrender at Appomattox, the war is basically over.